All right, so this is the learning chapter and is all about behaviorism, shaping behavior. We're going to learn about Ivan Pavlov's and John Watson's classical conditioning, as well as Skinner's operant conditioning, Thorndike, and Albert Bandura. So we want to shape behavior to get sometimes kids to act differently, behave better. We do this with training animals. And so there's different methods in which we go about this. And so we focus just on behaviors in this chapter and how we can shape and adapt those behaviors for better outcomes. So we do this through a process called associative learning. And so with associative learning, we're breaking that down into classical as well as operant conditioning. So as I mentioned on the first slide, classical conditioning is Ivan Pavlov and John Watson, and then operant conditioning is Skinner, and then Thorndike kind of follows that a little bit as well with his theory. And then observational learning is Albert Bandura, and he did the famous Bobo doll study where the adult was beating up on the Bobo doll, which is like a big blow-up doll that's like weighted on the bottom with sand or water, and you punch that and it pops back up. And so the kids watched the adult beat up on the doll, and then they got to go into the room and play. And then, of course, the control group didn't see the adult and just got to go into the room and play. So we'll look at that later on in the chapter as well. When we see the golden arch, what do we associate McDonald's with? Food, their burgers, their fries, maybe their drinks. Kids start to associate and pair the toys that McDonald's offers with the food. And so this is the associative learning in classical conditioning. You take something like food, you pair it with something else that appeals to the person, and they start to make that connection. And so kids don't want to go to McDonald's necessarily for the food when they're young. They want to go for the toy and the Happy Meal. They want to go because they like the characters. They get excited if, they go to McDonald's and Ronald McDonald is present. McDonald's tends to have the hot new toys. So big movies that come out, McDonald's will have those toys in the Happy Meals. Kids have seen the movies, now they want the toys. Let's go to McDonald's, not so much for the food, but for the toys. So that's how we start to pair items in the environment with something that appeals to each individual person. So this is Ivan Pavlov's famous experiment that he's known for. We have our salivating dog, but the dog is salivating to the bone, or food. Then we introduce the bell, but the bell means nothing at this point. You could just ring a bell, the dog's going to give no response. The response to the bell comes after you pair the bell with the food. So when you present food to a dog, the natural response to that is to salivate. Okay, so the UCS, unconditioned stimulus, is the food. The UCR, unconditioned response, is the dog's natural response to the food. Ring the bell, no response. Sometimes this second line here, where it says bell, no response, is known as the neutral stimulus. So you might see it as NS, neutral stimulus, because it's neutral at this point. It doesn't give any reaction to the dog. The connection, like I said, comes after the pairing. So you ring the bell, present the food, ring the bell, present the food, ring the bell, present the food. You do that over and over and over again, the dog starts to make a connection between the bell and the food. So in the last stage here, you can pull the food, just ring the bell, and you're going to get this response again, the salivating response. So the bell starts off as the neutral stimulus, then becomes the conditioned stimulus after pairing, which is the CS. The conditioned response is the dog will salivate to the bell. Of course, in the dog's mind, we're thinking that it's food, because we've paired it with the food, but you will get the response where the dog will salivate to the sound of the bell without food being present. This is only going to last, though, for so long. Eventually, extinction will set in, and you will not get that same response if you don't periodically throw the food back in there. So it's not a set number, like every third time, every fifth time, every seventh time, or anything like that. But sporadically, that food needs to be presented to get the dog to maintain this conditioned response of salivating to the bowel. So this is a little bit more about the experiment that Ivan Pavlov did. So you're going to hear me talk about it on the worksheets you guys do in class, the UCS, the UCR, the CS, and the CR. So get comfortable with that, get familiar with it. Think of unconditioned stimulus as something that happens natural without any kind of training involved. And so that stimulus that's presented gives us an unconditioned response, right? No training, no conditioning, no anything, right? So the stimulus happens and the dog naturally responds. In this case, in Pavlov's experiment, you show a dog food and automatically they're going to respond, right? They're going to respond by the salivating. And then we have the CS and the CR. There's also another term sometimes that is the NS. So the NS and the CS are really the same thing, neutral stimulus, but the bell is the conditioned stimulus, which started off as the neutral stimulus, and it became conditioned after we paired it with the UCS. So we'll go through this a little bit more. So conditioned stimulus should ultimately give us the same conditioned response in the end as the unconditioned response. After you're done reading this scenario, think about what the CS is, the conditioned stimulus. In Pavlov's experiment, the conditioned stimulus was the bell. So think about it for a few moments. What is your prediction as to what the conditioned stimulus is? When you flip to the next slide, you will see the answer revealed. So how many of you got it right and picked the new house as the conditioned stimulus? So the entire layout of this would be the UCS is the oatmeal chocolate chip cookies. Nobody has to condition you to want to eat oatmeal chocolate chip cookies. You can smell those and your natural response is to, want cookies. We feel better. They're comfort foods for us. So the conditioned stimulus is the new house. And how that became the conditioned stimulus is because we paired the oatmeal chocolate chip cookies with the new house. So when you walk into this new house, you get this feeling of warmth and friendliness, which is the same feeling you get from the cookies. Oftentimes, if you've ever been through like an open house where the realtors sit, they open the house, you walk through it, they have a tendency to have fresh cookies baking in the oven because they know that's what appeals to people. It makes people have this homey comfort feeling, and that's what they're looking for when you walk through somebody's house in an open house. So the UCS is the smell of oatmeal chocolate chip cookies. The UCR to that would be the feeling of warmth and friendliness. The CS is the new house, and the CR would be the feeling of warmth and friendliness. Your R's are always going to be the same. The UCR and the CR, we want to get the same reaction. We just want to get it using two different stimuli. While caring for a friend's dog, you notice that it displays a fear-like posture as you roll up a newspaper. You try this several times more and become convinced that this dog is generally afraid of rolled up newspapers. Is this classical conditioning? The answer to this is yes. The rolled up newspaper is your CS. The response to the rolled up newspaper is this fear-like posture. So we have to kind of backtrack a little bit. It doesn't spell out in the scenario exactly what the UCS is. And this is where I tell students you kind of have to infer what it is that is going on that's causing the dog to act like this. So our UCS in this case would be the dog being hit. We pair being hit with the newspaper, and so the dog starts to make this associative connection between being hit and the newspaper. So the UCS is being hit, the UCR is fear-like posture, the CS is the rolled up newspaper, and the CR is the fear-like posture. At a red light, Bob and Fred automatically tensed and felt chills when they heard the screech of tires behind them. Later, while watching a car race, Bob remarked how the screeching of tires was having little effect then. Fred agreed and wondered why they reacted at all because neither had as much as a dent on his driving record. Is this classical conditioning? And the answer to this is no. We have two different stimuli. We have the screech of tires behind them. We have watching a car race. But we have two different reactions. They had a reaction and tensed up when they heard the screech of tires. They did not get the same reaction during the car race. So our UCR and our CRs are different. So we do not have classical conditioning demonstrated in this example. So I want you to go ahead and watch this video clip of the little Albert experiment that John Watson did in regards to classical conditioning. While you're watching it, I want you to try and come up with what the UCS is, the UCR, the CS, and the CR. And it'll be revealed in the next slide what the results are, but I want you to try and come up with it on your own first. Arvilla is his mother, and she is predicted to have died in 1988. Douglas, on the other hand, is little Albert's real name. And there's a lot of research into this, but I can't say that this is 100% accurate. There's predictions that he died of hydrocephalus in 1925, so he would have been 5 or 6 years old. So we don't know the outcome of this research, which is unfortunate because it's not an experiment that we can replicate. We can't condition babies to be fearful of anything, which is what Watson did in his experiment. And so we can only watch this, learn from it, and take away what we can, but based on ethics today, we cannot replicate this experiment. And we also don't know long-term how this would have affected little Albert, and would he continue to be fearful, as an older child or as an adult. So we have a lot of unanswered questions in regard to his case, and a lot of uncertainty as to exactly what happened with him. So this breaks down Watson's experiment. Right? So if you look on YouTube, there's a bunch of clips for Watson's experiment with little Albert, or if you've watched it here in the PowerPoint, the clip. But basically Watson, presented all these soft furry items to little Albert, and he was fine with them. There wasn't any kind of response or reaction, but there was a response to the loud noise. And so Watson would bang this loud bar behind little Albert, which would scare him. So that bar is our unconditioned response, that noise from the bar is unconditioned response. The unconditioned stimulus. And then we pair that with all these furry things. And so these furry things that started off as neutral stimulus, like you see the rat here, now become the conditioned stimulus because of that associative learning. Remember that term from early on? So that's the associative learning that's being made. And so the unconditioned stimulus is that loud banging noise, and then our unconditioned response, a little Albert scared of it, so naturally he cries. Then we pair that loud noise with the animals, or the soft furry things, and now every time little Albert's presented with one of these soft animals, he starts to cry. The next several slides have scenarios. So on the following slide, you're going to read a paragraph, a scenario, and I want you to try and think of what the unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, conditioned stimulus, conditioned response is. And then the following slide will have the answers. Okay, so spend some time thinking about what the answers would be, maybe write them down, and then you can check your work on the following slide. So the next several slides are like that. So pause this because I'm about to give you the answer. So try and come up with it on your own first. And then you can continue to listen for the correct answer to see if you're right. The unconditioned stimulus in this case would be the drug itself, right? So the drug, we give the drug and it gives us an automatic response, right? An unconditioned response, which is the increased heart rate, right? So the UCS is the drug, the UCR is the increased heart rate. We pair that with the small room. And so the conditioned stimulus is the small room. And now every time we're in a small room, our heart rate increases. So our CR is also the increased heart rate. And if you've noticed, all of these, the R's are the same. The UCR, CR are the same. We want the same response. We just want to get it from two different stimuli. So same thing as the last slide, pause this because I'm going to go through this and give you the answer, but hit pause, try and figure out what the answer is, and then continue to listen so that you get the right answer and see if you're correct. So with Martin in the plane ride here, so he has a panic attack, right, during this plane ride. So the unconditioned stimulus is the plane ride. The unconditioned response is the panic attack that he has, right, this fear that he has from the plane ride. We pair that with just the thought of, you know, taking another ride on an airplane. So the thought of, you know, taking a flight is going to be our conditioned stimulus, and our conditioned response is still going to be that fear, that, you know, panic that comes with that. So this is B.F. Skinner's, what's known as the Skinner box. He worked on a theory called operant conditioning. Basically, we want to shape behavior. We shape behavior by using punishment or rewards. Positive and negative punishment, positive, negative rewards. When you think about this, though, you can't think of positive and negative as good and bad. Think of positive as adding, negative as taking something away. Whether you use positive or negative reinforcement, reinforcement always wants behavior to continue. Positive or negative punishment always wants behavior to stop. So we can see like the electric grid here that the rat is stepping on would be considered positive punishment because we're adding a shock to the situation, to the behavior. So that would be considered positive punishment. The next few slides just go over some definitions from Skinner on reinforcement and punishment. So make sure you take a look through there and read what the definitions are so you get a better understanding. So this is part of Bandura's social learning theory on observational learning. Basically, there's two groups. There's a group of children that saw the adult beat up on the bobo doll, and then there's the control group that went into the room, played with the toys, did not see the adult beat up on the bobo doll. When the experimental group was let in, they were found to have shown more aggression, not just physically, but also with their language, the types of words and things that they were saying. And this is where we get the idea that there's a correlation between observational learning, kids watching others do things or adults do things, and how they behave. Now, we can't say it's a causation because there's too many other external stimuli, things in the environment, maybe psychological factors that we would need to consider to say that if a kid watches an adult, you know, beat somebody up, that's going to cause them to beat somebody up as well. We can't make that a direct causation. because there's too many other factors to consider. We hear this more talk about this lately with all the school shootings that we've had. One of the common themes among all of the shooters is that they've all played violent video games. So we can say there's a correlation between violent video games and these mass shootings, but we can't say that that's what's causing it. So, we have to look at mental health. We have to look at, environmental factors. We have to look at bullying. We have to look at every aspect of their life that may have influenced their decision to go out and commit these crimes that they did, but we can't say that it's specifically because they played violent video games that this is why they went out and, committed these crimes.